Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. I've said on a number of occasions that the precision and thoroughness with which someone who has more realization approaches things comes out of caring, not out of fear. Some people are thorough and precise out of fear, and then they usually have a very narrow band, so they'll miss things. They decide, if I do it this way, I won't get in trouble. But then they miss a bunch of other stuff. And of course, the desire to do something correctly out of a desire not to be criticized is totally self-referential. But the quality of deep caring about other people's experience leads to this much broader kind of inclusive thoroughness and precision and taking care with things, and also relates to the aesthetics of things, like wanting things to be appealing and fulfilling to people when they look at them. When you are attuned to that in yourself, then you also perceive that in productions around you, whether it's someone's house or a meal or music or a work of art or clothing. You notice how well things are tended to. And seeing things tended to well produces a kind of quality that can indicate love and concern for other people. We can also have quality that's just a status symbol. For instance, there's some very, very expensive American cars where they sort of like throw everything at it to try to make it look expensive and indicate something about the person driving it. That doesn't communicate itself as the kind of care that I'm talking about. This is where the idea of vulgarity comes in. You know, vulgarity is quality without care. Just sort of haphazard largesse that isn't really about caring about anything. Kind of interesting. When people have a lot of money and they just randomly spend it on stuff they think communicates their wealth, but it doesn't communicate care. When you go to a restaurant and you're served food that's made out of things that are grown by big agriculture full of pesticides and not very good quality, and then the meat comes from animals that are literally tortured, and it's just put together in a haphazard way. You feel all that. Like when you are caring for things, then you feel there's like this pain in the food, right? There's pain in the food. And it's not aesthetically pleasing either. The way that I tend to things really just is an indication of caring. It's not because I have some dogmatic attachment to things being a certain way. I just want people to have a good experience. I want people to feel fulfilled. I want people to enjoy beauty. I want people to feel cared for, right? I want people to feel cared for. And there's also just an appreciation when you feel the care and something that's been prepared for you. When you go into a restaurant and you feel the care that's gone into the design of the restaurant and the service they're offering and the way the food's prepared. And remember the first time we ever went to that sort of bistro-y place, and the person that was waiting on us just knew so much about the food and obviously cared about it so much and wasn't just rattling off a bunch of stuff. She was really into describing the provenance of the food, and it was so beautiful, and everything was simple but really beautiful. And the whole place had this very warm atmosphere. That was really a wonderful experience, right? One time I was in a really cheap restaurant. It was in Portland, Oregon. I don't remember where, but went there by myself. And the server was just so caring. She was like a bodhisattva, you know? And I said something to her about how beautifully she was serving people. And that just makes all the difference. It's about what we're giving, not what we're getting, always. A fulfilling life is always about what we're giving, not what we're getting. If we're always focused on what we're lacking and what we need and what's going wrong for us and how our life is going and this, that, and the other, it doesn't matter if we solve all those problems. If we aren't feeling like an outward flow of energy and natural generosity, we aren't going to be happy. Just ain't going to happen. You can never be happy just getting what you want or getting out of things you don't want. Never.
I have a question about satsang. Recently, I haven't really been enjoying it as much as I do sometimes. Sometimes I feel nourished and it feels good to be here, and then sometimes it doesn't. Maybe it's just like some kind of ebb and flow thing that's not something I need to worry too much about.
Yep, that's right. It's an ebb and flow. That's just the way things are. Life is uneven and everything is fine. That's the thing. You just keep going, doing your best. It can be anything from like a little depressing to scary when you feel connected to your practice and your teacher and the community, and then something starts to wane. You know, you feel more disconnected and you can be like, whoa, what's happening? There is some benefit, you know, if you feel committed, if you yourself feel committed to practice and you understand the value of it for you, not just like some rule out there that you're following, then there is some benefit in just toughing it out and practicing even though you don't feel as connected. There's periods of time that everybody goes through where it feels more desert-like practicing or like more of a slog. What I've found in my practice is that if you just keep going during those times, there's some reward, really. There's something in process, and things are unsettled and you don't feel quite as connected, but then if you keep going, something really opens up more deeply. That's been my experience. But it's not just a matter of doing it as a rule follower thing, but more like understanding the process and understanding how it works and understanding that when you show up when it's difficult, it makes a difference. It really makes a difference. If you're committed to it, naturally in yourself.
Can you talk about the body as a map of wisdom?
One of the, if not the most fundamental principle of how things work is as above, so below. Although there's really not any above and below, but in any case, we can say that. But everything here is an expression of that subjectivity we call existence or reality itself. Everything is working along a handful of principles that recapitulate at each level of the creation. If we think of things as moving, as we do in Trikashaivism, from the totally unconditioned, Paramashiva, through to very, very, very subtle, slightly less subtle, slightly gross, slightly more gross, to Jada, insentient stuff, experience of insentient stuff. Along that continuum, or that what I like to call the cascade of becoming, going from subtle to gross, that is recapitulated in our energy body. If we look at the journey from Muladhara Chakra to Sahasrara, that is a journey from the gross to the more subtle. And it's a map in that sense, so it's just like the tattvas, right? It's a recapitulation of the map of the 36 or 37 tattvas. And then there's a mirror image between the chakras below the navel and the chakras above, and the navel is the transformation point. So, for instance, it's easiest to understand between the second chakra and the heart, because at the second chakra we're mediating ordinary relationships, ordinary connectivity, ordinary love, sexuality, etc., among other things. But when that energy is transmuted through the third chakra and expresses itself in the heart, all those things become universalized. So universal love and compassion rather than just, I love you, let's spend our lives together. Things are being recapitulated and getting more subtle and more universalized, just like they are in the map of the Tattvas, the map of creation. And then what's inside the channels, working with various kinds of kriyas, again, we're recapitulating the cascade or the continuum from gross to subtle. What we're doing is we're using our physical body and our energy body to walk back or walk toward the more subtle from the gross expressions. Our physical body is the same as the energy body. It's just a more gross expression of energy. Gross meaning tangible, dense, and solid experience. And our wisdom body is a more subtle expression of our energy body, but they're all the same body, just, again, recapitulating and recapitulating at different levels. We are using that to walk toward subtle experience, and then we're subtilizing the whole experience when we come back to this manifest life. The channels we have are already more subtle. The channels are an aspect of our energy body, already more subtle than the physical experience. Although they have a lot of physicality, there's a lot of sensation involved in working with the channels. But how do we work with them? We work with them with our subtle breath. We move subtle breath in the channels, or energy in the channels, and then we move awareness in the channel. We're going those 3 levels again. Ultimately, the discovery is that everything from gross experience to energy experience is all made of wisdom. That's what we're discovering when we're using that map of the energy body. What is coming out of the heart? That's one of the things I'm trying to open for people, that when we do the mantra practice and then we rest in the heart space, to discover that what's upsurging there, you could identify that as sensation or some movement of subtle energy, but then you also can contact it as wisdom, as the wisdom virtues like compassion, just that incredible vast intelligence of this alive, aware reality.
I've been sitting with this, just reevaluating my life and my decisions for doing pretty much everything. All work I've done on myself has been mainly to want a better world for the outside world, not necessarily doing it for myself. And then the realization of, if I just do the work just for myself, the rest will follow and the world will benefit.
Mm-hmm. If you do the work deeply, if you do sadhana, you will eventually naturally be skillful in benefiting others. That's true. But I want to tell you a story. When I was in my early 20s, I met someone who was a very radical organizer. I was living in New York City, and she did housing organizing, tenant organizing. This was something I was really interested in, and she kind of took me under her wing and taught me how to do this. She had a big agenda. I think she was a Marxist. She had a big agenda of the kind of world she wanted and lots of concepts about that. When she went to a building to help organize tenants, she basically wanted to organize there in such a way that the people she was organizing were supporting what she believed in, the world that she wanted, which makes sense. If you're a Marxist, you want a Marxist world, and you organize people and try to convince them to be Marxists and do that thing, right? So from her perspective, that made total sense. And we had a conversation one day, and I said, I don't do that. When I go to a building to organize, I find out what they want, and as long as it doesn't conflict with my ethics, I just try to support them in what they want. And she just rolled her eyes at me. And she said, I know that's what you do. You go in with a certain set of concepts and assumptions, and then you sort of organize your relationships with people that way, rather than just being there and finding out how other people actually are and starting from there. It's a little more pernicious than that in society in general, because the biggest weapon And the biggest privilege that is wielded by people of privilege is the power of the definer and the weapon of definition. So I tell you something about myself and you say, no, that's not the way it is. This is how it is. Or this is who you are, and this is what categories you're in, and this is how I think you should live. And you take up that position of the definer and of organizing everybody else's reality. This was the basic mechanism, other than like physical conquest, this was the basic underpinning mechanism of colonialism, where you categorize people and you define people, and particularly defining them as lesser than. And then you use that as the basis for exploiting them. And this is what men do to women all the time. So even if you think you're doing something positive, like defining women as the sacred feminine, or you put it on women to be interested in your project of worshiping their pure femininity or whatever, you are in the position of the definer. And even though it sounds good, I guarantee you that the women and other not so definitively gendered people in this community don't want to be defined that way, and they don't want to be defined at all if they're going to have any definitions, which I encourage them not to. But in any case, they insist a lot of the time, so what can I do? They're going to be the definitions that they come up with, not the ones that someone else gives them. So it is a reorganization for anybody, especially men, because this is the fundamental way that patriarchy functions, and colonialism and racism. It's all about wielding the power of the definer and taking up that position as the one who knows, and the one who knows who everyone else is and what everyone else should be doing. And it's a very hard position to give up. When people in positions of privilege are threatened in their position as the definers, they can get pretty nasty about it.
Can you say a little bit more about this role of the definer? How does that show up?
Wow, it's so ubiquitous. It's really hard to pull one example. There's a building manager here who's extremely sexist and does a sort of gaslighting light every time I talk to him. It's just like tiny little things that he says in the course of conversation. So I have this vent that makes noise when the wind blows, and I told him about it, and he said, yeah, we'll have someone come over, but, the people that own the building said it probably isn't really there's probably nothing wrong with it. That's taking up that position. Like my word saying that I was hearing noise in the vent is something they felt totally free to tell me was not actually the case. So that's a combination of taking up the position of the definer and actually gaslighting. But that kind of thing happens in the texture of every day to women all the time. You say what you know, and then some guy says, no, that's not the way it is. I know you think you know that, but that's not actually the way that it is. In fact, people make jokes. There's memes about it on the internet when you say something and then somebody says, well, actually, have you seen those memes? Well, actually, no, it's not that way. This is the reason why when women say something about their own experience that involves knowledge of something that happened or the way something was, and somebody else says, no, that's not the way it was, then for 3 days you're wondering if you imagined it or if it was real, or maybe you overreacted, or maybe you shouldn't have reacted that way, or maybe you don't know what. And this is the reason why women do that, because 1,000 times a month somebody says this kind of thing to us. Then we just start to embody that, constantly questioning ourselves. Someone lies to you and you say, you're lying, I know you're lying, and you're absolutely sure in that moment that you know the person's lying and you even have evidence. But then the person says, no, you're completely wrong. You have no idea. Whatever you thought you saw, you didn't see. What do? You go away and you're like, oh my God, did I falsely accuse it? Did I really see it? Maybe I'm seeing things, right? Because we're just constantly being questioned like that. So that's a part of the power of the definer, getting to say what happened and what it means and what you should care about and what you shouldn't care about. It feels good to be powerful. It feels good to be the one who can always have the final word on what's true and what's not true, what's real, what's not real, how people should be, how they shouldn't be.
Being a woman in this culture, I've lived with a lot of self-concept of how one ought to be. And what I've been feeling is it's all okay. However my energy shows up right now, it's that way because of every way that I've interacted with everything my whole life. And that was exactly how it was meant to be.
Well, I think one way of relating to that is that you're responding to your environment that you're in, your circumstances, in ways that are attuned to those circumstances, for better or worse. Some of those ways, on a relative level, might feel really appropriate, and some of them might not. But you're more than those responses. You're more than those responses. A lot of the responses you're talking about, like how we respond to being a woman in this culture, those are very conditioned, a lot of those responses. So it's true that it's all fine on some level and not a big deal. But on another level, it is getting in the road. Those things are all an aspect of impermanence. And a lot of that is an aspect of karma, so bound activity, bound energy. And it feels really marvelous to recognize that you are not condemned to respond those ways, that you can step out of those ways of responding, not just at will necessarily, but over time you can experiment with just stepping out of those. And then what is behind that, or what is informing that, is the self, the eternal self, which is in this state of total improvisation and not bound activity. So there's no concept about how we should be and how others should be, or how we are and how others are. There's no concept that needs to be held on to. None. For instance, many people of all different, kinds of people who have been marginalized in some way are afraid to step out of certain forms of behavior because they know that that will incur anger. So there's a fear about that. But behind that fear is a concept that having other people be angry at you is something bad and should be avoided at all costs. That's just a concept. Imagine if you were so free as to not have that concept, that having other people be angry at you was something to be avoided at all costs, and usually at the cost of your own joy and freedom of expression, right? People who are always avoiding other people's anger and criticism lead very constrained lives. So understand that behind the fear is a concept about anger, that it's bad and I should avoid it, and it's unpleasant and uncomfortable and perhaps even dangerous, and I should avoid it. And I'm going to moderate my behavior to avoid it because I have this concept about it. If you didn't have that concept, then you would be a lot freer to express yourself and a lot more skillful at dealing with or exiting the scene when people were angry at you for just expressing yourself freely. It would be enormously freeing not to have that concept. That's organizing behavior, organizing energy, organizing activity. So behind those more habitual ways that you are responding in the world, there's just the pure habit of body, energy, and mind, and the momentum that happens when you keep behaving the same way over and over. And yes, a lot of those things are in response to your circumstances, but some of it you just came in with, and you just are that way because of karmas that you brought in with you, not because of what's happening. Karma is a felt, lived experience. When you feel compulsion, that you're compelled or forced to respond in a certain way, you're actually feeling the force of karma, of habit. So it's a felt, lived experience. A habit pattern is a good other word for it. But we're trying to point toward This idea, for instance, that when you imagine someone's going to be angry at you if you do something, you're not going to do that thing, and you feel compelled to restrain yourself or zip your lip, you feel a compulsion and you feel a fear in your body about it. That is karma. That's the force of karma. Or when you tell yourself, like I often do, I'm never going to drink coffee again. But then like 3 days later, I find myself, I don't know, I'm just making coffee. That's a force. It's an actual quantity of energy that is moving in a certain direction with force. This is what we're countering when we do sadhana every day. But behind that is unbound energy, sitting behind that, somewhat obscured. Make experiments. You can experiment with your freedom. You can experiment with spontaneity. That's what I do. And little by little, you can have more confidence in it. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.